Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the person you've been calling you all your life, the one making choices, speaking words, wearing your name like a badge, isn't who you think it is. The room looks familiar, the mirror shows your face, but something is off. There's a flicker in your eyes, a shadow at the edges of your reflection, as though another presence, one you've never formally met, is standing just behind your shoulder. You move, and it moves. You speak, and it listens. For years you've assumed that your thoughts, feelings, and decisions were entirely yours. Yet here you are, sensing an invisible co-author who's been editing your life's script from the margins. What if you're not a singular self at all, but a divided being, partly conscious, partly concealed, locked in a lifelong negotiation with the parts of you you'd rather not see? This question is not new. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist whose ideas shaped the modern understanding of the unconscious, once wrote about the shadow, the hidden aspects of the personality we disown or repress, yet which continue to influence us from beneath the surface. You may have felt it yourself, the sudden flash of anger that seems to come from nowhere, the strange dream that unsettles you for days, the attraction to things you claim to despise. We bury what we find unacceptable, our fears, our envy, our unspoken desires, believing we've hidden them. But what if those buried fragments don't stay buried? What if they continue to live, think, and act within you, unseen but not inactive, shaping your relationships, your ambitions, and even your sense of morality? Look at your life's most inexplicable moments, the ones you can't justify logically. Why did you sabotage that opportunity you'd been waiting for? Why did you lash out at someone you love? Why does a part of you crave chaos while another part craves order? Could it be that the enemy you're fighting is not out there in the world, but within the walls of your own psyche? And if so, whose battle are you actually fighting each day? Your own, or the one waged by the shadow self you pretend doesn't exist? Consider the paradox. The more you try to be good, the more the hidden parts of you grow restless. The stricter your mask of perfection, the louder your inner rebel whispers. Society tells you to be polished, composed, agreeable, but your shadow thrives in the dark soil of everything you deny. Like a secret garden behind a locked gate, it grows unchecked. Yet the gate isn't just there to keep things out, it's also there to keep things in. Every time you judge someone else harshly, you may be glimpsing a disowned piece of yourself. Every time you feel inexplicable resistance to an opportunity, you may be brushing against the hidden hand of your own unconscious. How would your life look if you could actually see this shadow? Not as a metaphor, but as a living part of your identity? Would you recognize it in your dreams, in your fantasies, in the moments you call mistakes? Would it frighten you, or would it feel like coming home to a stranger you somehow already know? If the shadow is real, then every decision you make is a kind of negotiation between the self you show the world and the self you keep in the dark. That means every relationship you have, every failure and success, every burst of inspiration may carry the fingerprints of an invisible partner. This is the great question Jung forces upon us. What if the battle we're most afraid of fighting is the one already happening inside our minds? What if the you you've been defending isn't the whole you, but only the part you're willing to acknowledge? And if that's true, how much of your life has been lived by a ghost, an unrecognized force steering you through fear, desire, and contradiction? You might think you're in control, but control over what? Over a fragment, a fraction, a carefully lit stage, while the rest of the theater is shrouded in darkness? The paradox is that by denying your shadow, you give it more power. By refusing to look at it, you invite it to act without your consent. This is not just a psychological curiosity, it's an existential crisis. Because until you face the unseen self, every decision you make carries an echo of someone you're pretending not to be. And so we arrive at the threshold. Beyond it lies a question both terrifying and liberating. If you could meet the hidden self face to face, would you? Would you dare to ask what it wants, what it fears, what it's been trying to tell you all along? Or would you keep walking past the mirror, ignoring the flicker at the edges of your reflection? This is where our journey begins, at the uneasy intersection between the known and the unknown, where the person you think you are meets the person you've always been but never acknowledged. The shadow is not a monster lurking outside of you. It is the monster you've built within you by refusing to see it. The paradox is that you did not build it intentionally. From the moment you were a child, you were told, sometimes in words, more often in gestures and silences, what was acceptable to feel and what was forbidden. Anger? Hide it. Fear? Swallow it. Sadness? Smile instead. In 1,000 subtle ways, society whispered that parts of you were unlovable, dangerous, or shameful, and so you learned to push them underground. Yet repression does not destroy. It only transforms. Like a river diverted underground, the energy of those forbidden emotions continues to flow beneath the surface, eroding unseen tunnels through your psyche. Eventually, it emerges somewhere unexpected. A bitter remark you don't remember planning, a self-sabotage you can't explain, a recurring dream that feels like a warning. You may call it fate, bad luck, or a part of your personality, but Jung would say your glimpse in your shadow, an autonomous force of everything you've exiled. Carl Jung argued that the unconscious is not just a passive storehouse of memories, but an active, dynamic system. The shadow, in his framework, is not simply bad content, but unintegrated content. It includes everything your conscious self cannot or will not admit. Nietzsche, decades earlier, warned of the danger of denying one's instincts. He saw that morality, when too rigid, breeds hypocrisy and self-poisoning. Beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster, he wrote, a sentence that could serve as a motto for shadow work. When you fight your own darkness by pretending it isn't there, you risk becoming a stranger to yourself, wearing a mask so long that the face underneath withers. Schopenhauer, for his part, saw life as driven by an irrational will, an endless striving that the intellect cannot fully control. To him, suffering was inevitable because our inner drives exceed our conscious grasp. All three thinkers point to the same truth. The parts of us we repress do not vanish. They grow teeth in the dark. This is not merely an abstract idea. Modern psychology confirms it. Studies on thought suppression show that trying not to think about something makes it more likely to intrude. Repressed anger often manifests as depression. Repressed fear can surface as chronic anxiety. Unacknowledged desires become obsessions or compulsions. Even the brain's wiring seems designed for this paradox. The limbic system, our emotional core, responds faster than our conscious, rational prefrontal cortex. By the time you've told yourself, I won't feel this, you've already felt it. The shadow has already been activated, even if your conscious mind is still denying it. Consider the moral person who secretly envies those who break the rules, the perfectionist who harbors self-destructive impulses, the loving parent who occasionally imagines harming the child they adore. These thoughts and impulses are not evidence of being bad. They are evidence of being human. Jung's radical insight was that wholeness, not purity, is the goal. You cannot amputate parts of your psyche without consequences. You can only integrate them. But integration requires a terrifying first step, admitting that the parts you've disowned are still you. Why is this so hard? Because our identities are built like fortresses. Every belief you hold about yourself, I'm a good person, I'm strong, I'm not like them, is a stone in the wall. To question it feels like tearing down your own shelter, yet that shelter may already be a prison. Sartre wrote of bad faith, the act of lying to oneself to avoid freedom. We tell ourselves we have no choice, that we are just this way, because owning our full range of possibilities would mean accepting responsibility for them. The shadow is frightening, not only because it contains dark impulses, but because it reveals how much larger and freer we truly are than the roles we've chosen. Freedom is terrifying precisely because it removes excuses. And then there is shame. Shame is the cement holding the fortress together. It's not enough that society told you to repress certain feelings, it also taught you to feel ashamed for having them at all. Shame whispers, if anyone knew this about you, you'd be rejected. And so the shadow becomes a secret you keep even from yourself. Jung once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. In other words, The shadow you refuse to face writes your destiny for you. You may think you're choosing your career, your partners, your worldview, but how much of that is a genuine choice, and how much is the echo of a disowned self trying to be heard? Philosophically, this hidden battle raises an unsettling question. What does it mean to be you if large parts of you are invisible to your own awareness? If your conscious self is just the tip of the iceberg, who or what is steering the rest? Freud called it the id, Jung called it the shadow, and later thinkers like Huxley described the reducing valve of the brain, which filters reality to keep us functional but narrow. Maybe your identity is not a solid core, but a moving compromise, a treaty between conflicting forces inside you. If so, then the self you present to the world is a diplomat, not a sovereign. And how can a diplomat claim absolute authority over the nation they represent? The tragedy is that most people never ask these questions until something breaks. A crisis, a betrayal, a dream they can't ignore. These are often the first cracks in the mask. And the longer you've ignored your shadow, the more violently it announces itself. That's why midlife crises happen. That's why people out of nowhere sabotage their own success or pursue dangerous affairs. The shadow is patient, but it's also relentless. It waits for its moment to speak. And if you won't listen, it will shout. This is the hidden problem. You are not fighting a stranger, but yourself. The enemy within is not evil, but exiled. The self you repress today becomes the fate you live tomorrow. Until you recognize this, you're like a captain sailing with a mutinous crew below deck, unaware of the sabotage happening beneath your feet. If you close your eyes for a moment and imagine your life as a vast city, you may picture the main streets, the conscious choices you've made, the habits you're proud of, the relationships you've cultivated. Yet beneath that city runs an entire subterranean world. Tunnels, abandoned stations, secret passageways you've forgotten exist. This is where your shadow lives, and it is not idle. It is the unacknowledged architect of your patterns, your triggers, and your blind spots. What makes this so dangerous is not merely that the shadow exists, but that it operates invisibly. Like carbon monoxide leaking into a sealed room, it seeps into your thoughts and behaviors without obvious smell or color, until one day you're choking on consequences you never consciously chose. On the personal level, the shadow's influence can be devastating. Think of the brilliant artist who sabotages their own breakthrough because they fear success as much as failure. The loyal partner who erupts in jealousy over trivialities because of unhealed wounds. The leader who projects their inner chaos onto subordinates, mistaking their own insecurities for others' faults. These are not just quirks of personality. They are expressions of a hidden self demanding recognition. Because you have denied certain emotions or desires, they find back doors into your behavior. They shape your tone of voice, your body language, your dreams at night. You wake up wondering why you feel guilty or resentful or restless, unable to trace the source. The shadow thrives in this amnesia. Cognitive psychology offers names for some of these hidden operations. Projection, for instance, is the act of attributing to others what you cannot accept in yourself. You call someone arrogant because a buried part of you craves that same audacity. You accuse someone of being manipulative because you sense, somewhere deep down, your own capacity to manipulate. Jung called projection the chief means by which the unconscious reveals itself. But projection doesn't just distort how you see others, it distorts who you think you are. Each projection builds a false wall between you and your shadow, convincing you that the enemy is out there while it continues its quiet work in here. Neurologically, this is reinforced by the brain's default mode network, the circuits active when your mind wanders, when you think about yourself and others. This network stitches together a narrative self out of scattered memories and impressions. But the narrative self is a complete map. It's a curated story, edited for coherence and self-esteem. In other words, your own brain is built to hide the shadow from you. When confronted with evidence that contradicts your self-image, you experience cognitive dissonance, a mental discomfort that prompts you to rationalize or deny rather than integrate. Thus, the shadow remains in the basement, rearranging the furniture of your life while you decorate the living room upstairs. On the societal level, the consequences scale up dramatically. Entire cultures have shadows, traits and histories they repress, but which still drive collective behavior. Consider how nations project their disowned qualities onto other nations, casting them as evil empires or barbaric outsiders while ignoring their own atrocities. Consider how moral panics often reveal more about the panic's originators than about the supposed threat. Jung warned that when the individual refuses to face their shadow, the collective becomes susceptible to mass movements, scapegoating, and ideological possession. The 20th century proved him right in ways he could scarcely have imagined. When a society suppresses its contradictions long enough, they erupt as war, genocide, or authoritarianism. The crowd becomes the individual's unconscious writ large. Even in our private digital worlds, the shadow has found new playgrounds. Social media encourages curated identities, filters, highlight reels, avatars. But the more curated your public self, the hungrier your shadow becomes. Online anonymity sometimes acts as a release valve, letting people express aggression, envy, or desire they can't show under their real names. Troll culture, cancel culture, even certain conspiracy theories can be read as collective shadow phenomena, dark impulses spilling out under the pressure of polished personas. When you scroll through an outrage thread, you may be watchers. Watching hundreds of shadows collide. The emotional urgency of this realization cannot be overstated. Because the shadow works invisibly, you may spend decades fighting symptoms without ever touching the cause. You go to therapy for anxiety, but never explore the anger you've suppressed. You switch jobs or partners, thinking the problem is out there, while the same patterns reappear in new contexts. You chase self-improvement, mindfulness apps, productivity hacks, yet feel strangely hollow. This is not failure. It is the predictable result of ignoring the architect beneath your city. You are trying to fix the wallpaper while the foundation cracks. This hidden battle also warps your moral compass. When you are unaware of your own capacity for darkness, you divide the world into good and evil, heroes and villains. You become self-righteous, condemning in others what you refuse to see in yourself. But this very split makes you vulnerable to manipulation. Leaders who promise to destroy evil often tap into your shadow by giving you a scapegoat. History is littered with such seductions. Jung wrote after World War II that the greatest danger to humanity is not nuclear weapons or external enemies, but the unconscious state of the individual. A person who does not know their own shadow is easily led by collective ones, and yet the shadow is not merely destructive. It is also the reservoir of everything you've rejected but still need: creativity, passion, vitality, intuition. Many people live gray, depleted lives because they have locked away not just their bad qualities, but their aliveness. The same energy that fuels rage also fuels courage. The same desire that feels shameful can inspire art or connection. By keeping the shadow unconscious, you cut yourself off from half your potential. Like a tree forced to grow only on one side, you may appear upright but are internally twisted. Recognizing this can be overwhelming. It means that every conflict you've ever had, every mistake you've made, may hold a hidden message from yourself to yourself. It means your nightmares might be letters from your shadow, your self-sabotage a form of self-rescue gone wrong. It also means that integration, the act of facing and accepting your shadow, is not optional if you want to be whole. But before you can integrate, you must see. Before you can see, you must admit you are blind. This is the crisis point our journey has been moving toward. Up to now, you may have thought of the shadow as an abstract concept, something exotic or metaphorical. By now, you should feel its presence in your own life, in the tremors beneath your city, in the flicker at the edge of your reflection. The question now is not whether the shadow exists, but what you will do about it. Will you keep chasing symptoms, or will you dare to go underground and meet the architect face to face? And so the tension grows. If the shadow cannot be destroyed and ignoring it only empowers it, what can you do? How do you live with a co-author you didn't invite, but who writes in your voice nonetheless? The answer is not simple, and it is certainly not comfortable. But as Jung suggested, it may be the only path to becoming truly whole. Up until now, the shadow has appeared as a haunting presence, an unseen architect shaping your inner city, a co-author scribbling edits on your life script. But what if you could stop being the unwitting character in that script and start becoming its conscious writer? The rebellion begins not with destruction, but with recognition. You do not conquer your shadow by waging war against it. You liberate yourself by turning toward it, face uncovered. This act alone is radical in a culture that prizes control, neatness, and self-branding. To look into the mirror and admit, I am not just my virtues, I am also my flaws, my hungers, my rage, my tenderness, my contradictions. This is an act of spiritual disobedience. It violates every social instruction to stay tidy and predictable, yet it is the first crack of light in the tunnel. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming a whole person rather than a one-sided mask. Individuation is not a self-help buzzword. It is a rebellion against internal fragmentation. Instead of continuing the old war of repression, you begin to negotiate peace between the parts of you that have been estranged. This is why so many ancient myths depict heroes descending into underworlds, facing dragons, wrestling with gods or demons. These are not just stories about external monsters, they're symbolic maps of inner work. The hero who refuses the call stays in the village, safe but incomplete. The hero who descends returns scarred but whole, carrying new wisdom for the community. Practically, the rebellion begins with awareness. Start noticing your projections, the judgments that flare up at others, the traits you despise in them. Ask yourself, what in me resonates with this? Not to blame yourself, but to uncover hidden threads. Track your dreams. They are like encrypted messages from the shadow. Even your slips of the tongue, your sudden moods, your fantasies hold clues. This is uncomfortable because it destabilizes your old self-story. But remember, discomfort is the sign of the mask cracking. Second, practice radical honesty with yourself first. When a shameful thought arises, resist the reflex to banish it. Instead, name it without judgment. This too is me. Doing so does not mean acting on every impulse. It means refusing to lie to yourself about its existence. Nietzsche spoke of the will to power not as domination, but as the force of life asserting itself. When you acknowledge your shadow, you reclaim that force from unconscious sabotage and begin to direct it consciously. Third, cultivate compassion for your disowned parts. This may sound counterintuitive. Why show compassion to the very impulses that scare you? Because shame and self-hatred only drive them deeper underground. Think of your shadow as an abandoned child, not a monster. Its tantrums and manipulations are cries for recognition. When you approach it with curiosity rather than condemnation, it begins to soften, revealing the gifts hidden beneath its rough exterior: creativity, assertiveness, empathy for others' flaws. History is filled with people who enacted this rebellion, sometimes quietly, sometimes with world-shaking consequences. Consider Nelson Mandela, who emerged from 27 years of imprisonment without bitterness, able to integrate anger with forgiveness. Consider artists like Frida Kahlo, whose pain became vivid art rather than silent despair. Consider writers like Dostoevsky, who plunged into the darkest recesses of human nature, yet found in them a fierce compassion. These are not perfect saints. They are individuals who refuse to amputate their own complexity. Their lives demonstrate that integrating the shadow does not make you less moral. It makes you more human, more whole, and paradoxically, more capable of authentic morality. The rebellion also requires rethinking freedom. Sartre warned that freedom without self-awareness degenerates into bad faith, an unconscious acting out of roles. True freedom begins when you stop saying, "I had no choice," and start saying, "I see my choices, even the ones I don't like." This does not mean indulging every desire or impulse. Integration is not the same as indulgence. It is discernment. You learn to say, "This is part of me, but it does not have to rule me." Like a skilled conductor, you bring all the instruments of your psyche into harmony, rather than silencing half the orchestra and calling the noise that remains music. Breaking free also involves confronting the collective shadow. You cannot integrate your own darkness while participating blindly in group scapegoating or ideological poses. Cyan. When you catch yourself joining a mob, online or offline, pause. Ask, whose darkness am I carrying? Whose shame am I projecting? This is especially hard because belonging feels safer than individuation. But true rebellion may mean standing apart from the crowd, refusing easy narratives of us versus them. Jung believed that only individuals doing their own shadow work could prevent collective disasters. Your personal integration, then, is not just self-help, it is a small act of cultural healing. Some practical counterintuitive shifts can accelerate this process. Engage in creative expression without censoring yourself, writing, drawing, dancing. The shadow speaks in symbols, not bullet points. Through art, you give it a voice. Examine your envy. It often points to desires you've disowned. Practice setting boundaries. Sometimes your shadow is hidden in your people-pleasing. Explore controlled risks that scare you. Public speaking, saying no, revealing a vulnerability. Each act expands your capacity to hold your full self without splitting. Most of all, cultivate stillness. In the noise of constant stimulation, the shadow remains indistinct, but in silence, in meditation, in solitary walks, in honest journaling, it begins to take shape. At first, this can be frightening, like turning on a light in a long-locked attic. You may see things you'd rather not. But over time, you realize the attic also contains treasures you forgot, dreams, talents, passions. Integration transforms fear into curiosity, curiosity into empathy, empathy into power. This is the rebellion. No more running from yourself, no more delegating your choices to the unseen. You begin to live from a center that is both light and dark, known and unknown. You stop trying to be a saint and start trying to be whole. And wholeness, paradoxically, makes you more capable of genuine goodness than any performance of purity ever could. We are now approaching the threshold of the deepest revelation. If the shadow is not an enemy to be destroyed, but a part of you to be integrated, then what lies on the other side of integration? What is the ultimate truth that emerges when you no longer fight your own reflection, when you stand in the full light of your complexity? That is where our journey leads next. The final, most powerful realization. You stand at the edge of a mirror that no longer reflects only your face, but the entire landscape of your inner life. Everything you've denied, feared, envied, or longed for is now visible, shadow and light interwoven. At first it seems like chaos. Fragments of you you'd rather not claim, old memories rising like ghosts, impulses flickering like storm clouds. But as you hold the gaze, something strange begins to happen. The fragments rearrange themselves into a pattern. You realize the shadow was never an intruder, but a map, and that map leads here, to this moment of recognition. The final realization is not that you have a shadow, but that you are larger than the division between self and shadow. You are the field in which both arise. This is the paradigm shift Jung pointed toward, but never fully spelled out, the self with a capital S. Beneath the ego, the curated persona, the conscious mind, there is a deeper center that is already whole. It does not reject your darkness, nor idolize your light. It holds both, like two wings of the same bird. Individuation is not about constructing this self. It's about discovering that it was always there, waiting for you to stop fighting yourself long enough to feel it. In this space, the shadow is not an adversary, but a teacher, delivering back to you the energy you exiled. The integration you feared becomes liberation. Philosophers hinted at this from different angles. Nietzsche's eternal return was not just a thought experiment about time, but a challenge to embrace life so fully, with all its pain and joy, that you'd be willing to live it again and again. Schopenhauer's dark vision of the will can be transformed here. The blind striving becomes conscious participation. Sartre's existential freedom, once terrifying, now feels like grace, the recognition that your essence is not fixed, but chosen moment by moment. Viktor Frankl, who survived the camps, spoke of finding meaning even in suffering, meaning that cannot be destroyed from the outside. All of these threads converge in the realization that the self is not a static object, but an ongoing act of creation, and the shadow is raw material for that creation. You start to see how your life's mistakes were messages, how your repeated patterns were attempts at integration. The affair you regretted, the job you sabotaged, the anger you projected. Each was a signal flare from the part of you you'd exiled. When you reframe your story this way, shame loosens its grip. The fortress of identity cracks, not into ruin, but into openness. Instead of a diplomat negotiating between warring factions, you become a host who welcomes all guests at the table, even the unruly ones. You stop asking, "How do I get rid of my shadow?" and start asking, "What does it want to show me? How can we work together?" This is not indulgence, but responsibility at its highest level, owning all of yourself. Neurologically, something shifts too. Studies of mindfulness and compassion practices show decreased activity in the brain regions associated with self-criticism and increased integration between emotional and cognitive networks. In other words, when you stop splitting yourself, your brain stops splitting too. Creativity blossoms, empathy deepens, resilience strengthens. The same energy that once fueled sabotage now fuels insight. You begin to feel, perhaps for the first time, like an ally to yourself rather than your own saboteur. The ultimate truth also dissolves the hero-villain narrative you've carried about others. When you see your own shadow clearly, you see everyone else's more passionately. Projection loses its grip. The stranger you feared becomes another mirror. This doesn't mean you tolerate harm or erase boundaries. It means your boundaries are no longer built on illusion. You can say no without hatred, yes without self-betrayal. You become less manipulable because you no longer need a scapegoat to feel pure. This is how personal integration ripples out into the collective. One less person feeding the mob's unconsciousness, one more person anchored in self-awareness. And then comes perhaps the strangest gift of all, the realization that your shadow is also your source of vitality. Many people, after integrating disowned parts, report a surge of creativity, spontaneity, and even humor. The heaviness lifts not because life becomes easier, but because you're no longer spending energy on internal censorship. You discover hidden talents, forgotten dreams, richer intimacy. The shadow you once feared becomes a reservoir of aliveness. The underworld journey ends not in darkness, but in a spring of fresh water. This is not the end of your work, but the beginning of a different kind of living. Integration is not a one-time event, but an ongoing practice. New shadows appear as you grow. New contradictions emerge, but now you meet them differently, not as enemies, but as invitations. You become a student of your own psyche, an explorer of its uncharted territories. Life stops being a battle to be won and starts being an unfolding mystery to be participated in fully. Picture yourself back at that mirror from the first section. The flicker at the edge of your reflection is still there, but now you understand it. You turn toward it, and it does not shrink or snarl. It smiles because it was waiting for this moment. You realize the shadow was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to reunite with you. All along, the secret battle inside your mind was not a war, but a call to wholeness. The tension, the sabotage, the dreams, they were the self knocking on your door. The final question then is no longer, how do I